Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're coming to you from the studios of 91.7 FM KALW, Innovative Public Radio for San Francisco.
Carrying on conversations that begin at Philosopher's Corner at Stanford University.
That hotbed of thinking minds, John.
Yes, it's a hotbed. There's no doubt about it.
You know, our topic for today is disability. But I think that term is on its way to becoming politically incorrect. I think people would rather, at least some people would rather think of themselves as not disabled, but differently abled. What do you think of that?
Well, you know, Ken, that's one of those little political correctness things that really drives people mad because they say, look, first we said crippled, now we couldn't say that. We had to say handicapped, now we can't say that. We had to say disabled. Now they want to give up on that and say differently abled. But I think actually it makes a very good point because we have a picture that there are ordinary people, they just do things, and then there are disabled people, they need accommodation to do things. And that's the wrong picture.
Well, what's the right picture?
Well, let me most of what we do by moving our bodies or our limbs and then keying into interfacing with a huge technology that's been put in place over the years. And I mean everything from roads, language. Imagine sending a fax to Dagfinn in Norway. You move your fingers over the fax machine, and something happens in Norway. Now, a disabled person maybe can't move their fingers. Maybe they need voice input, or they need a secretary to help them. That's the only difference. Everything else, both you and the disabled person are relying on this huge infrastructure. That's why I think differently able is not a bad piece of political correctness.
So you think of disability as kind of an interface problem, right? Because me and the disabled person have different sort of basic bodily capacities. It takes a different interface to do these more complex things that we do these things by moving our body, but we do them things by moving our bodies in a situation with an interface intact.
Well, that's right. Take something as simple as getting to the second floor of a building. For 90%, 95% of the community, stairs will do the trick. For 5%, probably a rope would do the trick. They can just grapple up the rope. But you and I would be disabled if we couldn't get to the second floor. For the last 5%, you need elevators. So it's not that some people just do things and other people need help. It's that we all get help, but the help we get is more or less aimed at the 85%, or at least until recently.
But okay, so those of us let's put it this way: those of us who are sort of standardly abled, we can get by with the stairs, and some people need the elevator. But elevators seem reasonable. But take our example. It was kind of a throwaway example, but it has a serious point about the Grand Canyon, putting an elevator in the Grand Canyon. Should we go that far? I mean, what's reasonable?
Well, I think what's reasonable depends to a certain extent on when we're talking about. What seems reasonable now didn't seem very reasonable a few years ago, I'm sure.
You're certainly right. People weren't even really seized with this problem years ago. And our roving philosophical reporter, Amy Standen, went out and talked to a blind person who grew up in a time when people weren't making reasonable accommodations. She files this report.
When my vision first began to change, it was fairly gradual.
This is Anita Silvers. She's the director and CEO of San Francisco's Lighthouse for the Blind and Visually Impaired.
For example, in the second or third grade, I could see the chalkboard from the back of the room. By the time I was in fifth grade, I couldn't even read the chalkboard from sitting in the front row. Initially, people really thought I needed glasses, so they tried all sorts of different kinds of glasses. Then they decided that maybe I had some kind of vision, tired eyes or whatever related to watching too much television. This was the 50s, you understand, so there wasn't a lot of research as to how things like TV affected vision. It really was at about the age of 10 years old that everybody began to realize this was a situation that was getting worse and wasn't going to change. I continued to go to a public school in Kansas, but there was no support in the school system for the fact that I had a disability. So I was mainstream, but without any additional assistance. Teachers didn't quite know how to accommodate my disability. I didn't know how to, and nor did my family know how to accommodate disability. So it was actually a very upsetting, painful time in my life.
I'd heard that a lot of deaf people sometimes resist the term disability. They think of their deafness as a cultural difference, part of diversity. I asked Anita if the same could be said about blindness.
I actually understand the deaf community's way of viewing the term disability, it does sound like you're talking about something that, I'm unable, I'm disabled. And from someone in the deaf culture, they would say, I simply can't hear. I communicate another way. There's nothing disabling about hearing loss. Whether you have vision loss, whether you have hearing loss, whether you use a wheelchair, all those are just different ways that we are in the world. If the world were all people or majority of people who are blind, we would simply set up everything in the culture to accommodate that reality. There would not be any cars on the street, for example. Stoplights would be audible as opposed to visual. It's only a social disability, if you will. When I think of myself as a visually impaired person, I don't consider myself to be, quote, disabled, unquote. However, if I want to access an array of services, government-based or whatever, they have to have a definition. There has to be a way that I qualify or don't qualify. And that's when I think terms like disability end up needing to exist. We need to look at ways to include all of society in an integrated way. And I wouldn't stop with just people who are disabled. I would say that every member of our society should have rights to access our community as a whole. So it's a civil rights movement, if you will. It's the same, people with disabilities have the same rights and the same needs as people who have different cultural backgrounds or religious preferences or sexual orientations. We have the same rights as women, as any protected class in our community.
For Philosophy Talk, this is Amy Standen.
Thanks, Amy, for that interesting piece. Ken, we were talking before about people who have trouble doing things because things aren't set up for the movements they can make. Amy's piece brings up the opposite, getting information, the informational disabilities, deafness, blindness. And again, it's an interface problem, and sometimes literally an interface problem. The rise of the internet has created a lot of disabilities, inabilities, that didn't used to exist because screen readers used to be able to give blind people the information that was on the screen, and then along came the complicated graphics and so forth, and those things just break down, and all of a sudden a new disability or inability because technology didn't take into account the kind of interface that was needed.
Yeah, John, I know you've thought about this a lot, but I think we should bring on somebody else who's also thought about it a lot. That's our guest today, Professor Anita Silvers from San Francisco State University. She's the author of Disability, Difference, Discrimination, Perspectives on Justice in Bioethics and Public Policy, and she's also the Secretary-Treasurer of the Pacific Division of the American Philosophical Association, which supports a big supporter of Philosophy Talk. Anita, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thanks. Wonderful to see you all.
Hi, Anita, and let me tell you how much I love the Pacific Division. I've been a member of it for 40 years, where the conventions are known for the parties that never stop and the intellect that never starts. I don't know.
No, not quite.
I didn't have that quite right. Anita, let's start by defining our terms. You're a philosopher, and you've written this book, Disability, Difference, and Discrimination. You must in there have a definition of disability or a discussion of those issues. How do you think of this concept of disability?
Well, let me see if I can interface with the conversation you gentlemen have just been having. I think you're ignoring an important aspect of all of this. I think you're not noticing that disability is a social convention. It's really a politicized term. If you look back at the history of the term, I think what we learn is that it's used to designate individuals and groups in order to justify removing them, either from the workplace or from other kinds of social participation. And that raises some very interesting philosophical questions. Sometimes removing them is from participation is benign. If you can't compete, if you can't really succeed the way other people can, then this is a category that sometimes has enabled the government to take care of you or other people to take care of you. But more often, it's being used as a designation because other people, the majority, don't want to interact with you.
When you say, I take your point, but when you say the concept of disability is a social kind of stigmatizing concept. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think the use to which the concept's been put, there are social stigmatizing uses to which the concept have been put, and it's been put to that use in service of removing certain people. But can we sort of analyze, what the concept is independently of the kind of social use to which, so that the Americans with Disability Act, I take it, purports to end the thing you just said about removing people. It purports to do that anyway.
That's right. But the question is, who, in fact, is protected under it? And the National Council on Disability, which is a federal agency, is now proposing a Restoration Act for the ADA, attempting to change the emphasis from who is disabled, that is defining some people who are going to be protected and some people who aren't, and instead focusing on disability discrimination. So that if you are an object of disability discrimination, you would be protected whether or not you fit somebody's definition.
Yeah, but still, there are practical problems that philosophers ought to contribute to. Suppose I'm a small business, I'm just barely making it, and I am told that I need to hire a otherwise qualified but quite obese person. And I need to change things around. They are so obese that, is obesity a disability? Is that fair? Don't we have to draw the line somewhere? Aren't there some conceptual issues that make a difference between someone who's lost their limbs or is blind and someone who's simply grossly overweight? These things are coming up in law. Don't philosophers have some contribution to make?
Well, actually, they came up in law about 10 years ago, and we're well past that now. And I will eventually drag you back to the issue I wanted to talk about. But right now, the way that you've framed the question, John, I would move to the National Council on Disabilities' emphasis on disability discrimination. What's the problem with hiring a person who is very large? Is it because you have a very small shop and the person won't fit into it?
Could be.
Well, if they can't fit into it, then under the ADA, they can't do the essential tasks of the job, because ordinarily, if you're going to work in a place, you need to fit into it. Or is it a different notion that you think such a person would turn customers away? Now, that kind of response, we've heard that before. We can't hire women because our customers won't want to interact with them.
Or black people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't want to talk too long, but the remark that Ken just made, I'd like to come back to, because the history of disability is a very interesting one.
But let's consider this issue. You make a very good point that disability is one of these concepts that has many uses, and in the Americans with Disabilities Act, we see at least an attempt to use the concept to improve things for people with disabilities, but particularly disability or the word handicap before that, or the word crippled before that, have a negative connotation and an explanation of why people don't need to be brought into the mainstream, don't need to be hired, already exploited, put away in the closet and forgotten about. As philosophers, can we help draw the line? Is there a small businessman who might be right about the fact that people with disabilities of various sorts might turn off their customers?
I'm going to let that question hang in the air for a while, Anita, and you can think about it and hammer John on an answer in a little bit. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Our topic is disability. Our guest is Professor Anita Silvers of San Francisco State University. You can join our discussion. We're eager to have you join our discussion by calling 415-841-4134.
This is an encore presentation of Philosophy Talk. The phone lines are closed.
4134.
Coming up, we'll be talking about accommodating people with disabilities. Wheelchair ramps in front of office buildings are one thing. Then there's our example about an elevator or a wheelchair ramp down the Grand Canyon. Where does reasonable accommodation end and social hijacking of scarce resources begin? Join us at Philosophy Talk, 415-841-4134.
Philosophy Talk, we'll be right back.
Plays a mean pinball.
Pinball Wizard by The Who. I'm John Perry. You're listening to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. We're discussing disability with Anita Silvers of San Francisco State University.
Join us. The number is 415-841-4134.
This is an encore presentation of Philosophy Talk. The phone lines are closed.
4134, or email us at comments@philosophytalk.org.
Just before the break, Anita, we left John's question hanging in the air. And you know what? What was that question that John left hanging for you?
But what I'd like to do is bracket John's question,
Whatever it
change
was.
the framework, and then come back to it.
Okay. What is it that you want to...
Okay, let's begin. Ken, you started off by saying that you think there is a non-social component to the notion of disability.
Right.
And I think there is. Historically, there has been a notion of bad biology.
Yeah.
And bad biology is then used as a reason for excluding people from various kinds of opportunities and from social interaction. And I've traced this, for instance, shown the similarities between the one drop of blood argument that of the 19th century. We do not let African Americans interact with us because they have bad blood, even if they have one drop of blood. Same arguments for women in the 19th century. They're weak, they're frail, they're biologically defective, and we have to isolate them or they'll infect all of society.
But wait a minute. Okay, let's contrast the notion. Help me out with this biology component of disability. Contrast the notion of disability with the notion of a disease. I mean, we don't exclude people with some diseases, I guess, leprosy in the old days, people, but or maybe mental illnesses. But lots of diseases we just want to treat. We don't want to exclude people. We don't think of... What's the difference between a disability and a disease from the kind of point of view of biology, as you understand? I mean, can you help me with that?
Yeah, because some diseases are disabling, some are not. And the fact that we can say that suggests that there's not a parallel here.
I know, but both have biological components, right?
That's right. So we start with the biology. There's anomalous biology. Some of the anomalous biology is limiting, some is not. Certainly women's bodies are different from men's bodies. And there's some things that men can do that women can't. There's some things that men can't do. They can't bear children, although I'm told that we're about to find a way that we can have them gestate. I know you guys are waiting for that.
Yeah, right. At my advanced age.
Well, it would be like getting you guys to do the dishes. So, we begin with the anomalous biology. The question then is, to what extent is it limiting, and how important are those kinds of limits? Or can we have a society that accepts various kinds of limits? Does that begin to show a difference?
It begins. But see, you were challenging John's approach that disability, we should think of it as, at some level, an interface problem. But actually, it sounds like
I'm agreeing with him about that.
Yeah, but it goes beyond that because it's an interface problem with a kind of social disapprobation element.
Yes, exactly.
Well, there's your colleague Paul Longmore has an interesting lecture I heard about the I think 3 different ways of reacting to disability. One is it's a deficiency, probably due to the sins of your parents or something like that. Then the other one is it's kind of ennobling. You see that in a lot of movies, the disabled person as the hero, and disabled people with disabilities don't particularly like that version any better than the first. And the third is it's just a difference. Now, I guess I'm starting from, if we accept that it's just a difference, there's still a lot of problems. I mean, when does reasonable accommodation begin, and when does what's sometimes called social hijacking or unfairness to the small entrepreneur? And a lot of people worry about that in unrealistic cases. Nobody's really proposing to make piano playing available to people with no arms, or to make the Grand Canyon available to or put an elevator in the Grand Canyon, or to make it so quarterbacks can be in wheelchairs. But people kind of have that. That's the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about this reasonable accommodation. And so how is the right way to think of it? Where how much resources can we use for that final 5%, getting them to be a part of the whole thing?
Well, this is, of course, not a question that's just about disability. It's a question about whenever we have a minority. There's one of your colleagues in the law school has a very interesting argument in which he argues that we should not put money into special education for disabled children but instead should put that money into special education for gifted children.
We have a colleague like that? I didn't know that. I don't like that.
Well, I don't know why it would be the same money we shouldn't take away from the one and give to the other.
But anyway, how do you want us to think about this reasonable accommodation? I mean, there has to be a line, I suppose. I mean, we're in the business of line drawing. Is there a principled line that one can draw somehow?
Well, I don't think there's one line. I think we have to get at the issue of why we want to draw lines and for what purposes. So let's begin with people. We have minorities that are biologically anomalous. Now, integrating them, interacting with them, may mean that the majority has to do something other than its usual practice. Now, to what extent is the majority obligated to do something other than its usual practice? One dimension is how hard is it to do? A second dimension is why did that usual practice originate in the first place? A third is how important is it to us? And this is a crucial question. To bring into society individuals who are biologically anomalous. And I would like now to focus on why that is very important to everybody who is listening.
Okay.
Well, let me first just try to give you a concrete thing to react to. Take the issue of blind people interfacing with the internet. Places like Microsoft are constantly producing innovations that usually make it hard for blind people to interact with the internet. What should we do about that? For example, Windows 95 became accessible just about the time that Windows 98 was introduced for everybody else. Should we have limits on how people can innovate if it makes it more difficult for people with disabilities, or am I just looking at it in the wrong way?
Well, but this is exactly the point that I raised. We have to find out how hard it is first. As it turns out now, most Microsoft products are accessible. Screen readers are much more successful than they used to be. That's, of course, because people kept pushing. And Microsoft finally got it, as did many other software developers. So sometimes changing what we're doing seems a lot harder than it really is. Sometimes changing what we're doing for a minority is something we resent.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking with Professor Anita Silvers of San Francisco State University about disability. What are disabilities? How should we reasonably accommodate people? And we'd like you to join our discussion. You can do so by calling 415-841.
This is an encore presentation of Philosophy Talk. The phone lines are
Comments
closed.
at philosophytalk.org, and we have some callers on the line now. Anne in Berkeley, welcome to Philosophy Talk, Anne.
I've got about 4 things to say, if that's okay.
Well, let's see. Let's start with the most important.
One is, how many disabled people do you have on the program?
Well, we have one on right now. Anita Silvers is a disabled person.
Oh, yeah? Well, I'm disabled or blind or lame, and you can use any of those terms. I don't care. But I think the problem is that people are afraid of us.
I think that's right.
I've never... I've had a lot of people be afraid to ask if they can help me because some disabled people have been very rude. And I think that's a shame, and I don't know how to go about educating that. But I'm blind and disabled, and I was on the Commission on Disability in Berkeley for a while. And I think I've seen parents drag their kids so they won't have to look at me or they're afraid they're going to make me feel badly. And I think there should be fairs in the cities with wheelchairs and crutches and canes and walkers and everything for all the community people to try it out and have a, kind of a fun fair so that they can ask all the questions they want and they're not afraid of us anymore.
But Anita uses it's not really a wheelchair. It's
sometimes I use a wheelchair and sometimes I use a scooter. They're both electric because I can't use my hands.
And she can get around conventions faster than I can. I've noticed that. I think she often knows some secret passageways.
John follows me when I'm headed to the bar.
I'm scared to death of her, but it has nothing to do with her disability. It's her formidable intellect.
Yeah. And thanks for that. Thanks for the comment. Did you want to add something to Anne's thing, Anita? We also have John in Alameda on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, John.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the thoughtful program. First, a quick comment, and then maybe a kind of framework to try and approach the problem of what a reasonable accommodation is. I actually have a temporary disability as a result of a work-related injury, and in talking to a friend of mine who's permanently disabled, her observation was that perhaps we should think with a little more humility that we are all just temporarily abled. And sooner or later, we all end up completely disabled.
John, thanks for the comment. Anita, you just gave the high five sign to that comment.
I want to take your very important comment in a direction you're probably not expecting. It is the case, I believe, that we're on the verge of a society in which many people in the biological condition they are right now, who we would not think of as disabled, will be treated as disabled. A very quick story about the Chevron refinery in a Supreme Court case. A gentleman who worked for them tested positive for Hep C, no symptoms. They fired him. A little more detail I'm not going into. They fired him on the ground that he might. Now, he'd been working, he'd been positive for Hep C, and he'd been working there for 25 years. They fired him on the ground that he might possibly develop symptoms, and that would be something that would be an imposition on his fellow workers. The Supreme Court upheld Chevron doing that. So that is the state of the law now.
Hepatitis C.
Yeah, hepatitis C.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now notice that many of us, probably all of us, have some gene or other that gives us a higher than species typical disposition to develop some disease or other. If we extrapolate, and I think this society is coming up on us, then many of you out there will be counted as disabled because you might develop a disease. And if you develop the disease, your fellow workers might have to pick up the burden for you, something like that.
I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think that raises an important question. Important question, but I think it's a somewhat different question, because that's about, the privileged information over your genetic code and whether there is any such privilege or should be any privilege, right? And you might never develop the thing. And if you never develop, because genetic stuff is always probabilities, there's a certain probability.
Well, that's a different issue.
Right, that's a different, yeah.
But this is exactly the point, because the way the Supreme Court read it, you didn't have to develop the disease, you just had to be biologically anomalous enough to have a higher than species typical chance.
But look, I mean, disability, not disability, that's a binary distinction. And even with what we currently call disabilities, it already limps a little. I mean, you're comparing blind people, deaf people. The interesting thing about deaf people is if they're left to their own devices, they're fine. There's been islands full of deaf people, and the only thing that bothers deaf people is having hearing people around to mess things up. Blind people, I don't think you can quite say the same thing. But so there's all kinds of differences. People have, paraplegics, quadriplegics, people losing one arm, one finger. So what we really got is a range of differently abled people. And as what Anita is suggesting, as we find more and more ways in which people differ in ways that are relevant to being accommodated in the workplace, we'll probably just give up the idea of disability and just have, this is the kind of person this is, and this is what we would have to do to make it work for them.
I think you have a deep point there, John. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about disability. What are disabilities? What's a reasonable accommodation? What's the principle in which we decide what reasonable accommodations are? You can join our discussion. Please do by calling 415-841-4134.
This is an encore presentation of Philosophy Talk. The phone lines are closed.
Or you can go to our webpage and send us a comment on the comments link at www.philosophytalk.org. Anita, I want to ask you, getting back to a point that John made just now, it seems to me, my son has maybe, we're not sure because all these diagnoses are contingent, and my son has a learning disability, we think. We're trying to figure out whatever that means. And the definition of these things change.
Absolutely.
You talk to psychiatrists, they think like attention deficit disorder. many psychiatrists are beginning to think that's a terrible diagnosis that covers too many ills, right? Too many different things. It's just there's an outward manifestation, but there's all sorts of different causal pathways leading to this. Now, back to the very idea of a learning disability. Why do we have this concept? Because teachers get up in front of a classroom, they talk at students, and some students learn that way well, and some students don't learn that way well, and we call the ones who don't learn that way well learning disabled or something. I wonder that seems illegitimate in some ways.
That's right. And notice that this fits exactly with the way I've been analyzing disability. There was a time when people had different cognitive styles, and we didn't think that was quote-unquote a disability. Different cognitive styles may be, to some extent, a matter of different biologies. Fine. People have different kinds of talents. But where we have a school system that demands one kind of behavior, one kind of cognitive style, and wants to exclude, or at least change,
or stigmatize in some way.
That's right. Individuals justify excluding individuals who don't have that kind of style. Then you see what we have now.
Well, our society has a real thing about reading. You might think reading is like a staircase. It's a way to get information into your head. And another way for a different person to be just as good, recordings or watching a good show on TV. But we also regard reading as a bit of an end of itself, a kind of an intellectual enjoyment that anybody ought to be able to have. And I think those two pictures get in our way in dealing with kids who at least at a given stage in their life may be perfectly capable of getting information into their head, but not very good at reading.
Why don't we take another caller? Don in San Mateo's on the line now. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Don.
Hi.
What's your question or comment?
A couple of comments.
Well, let's start with one because we're...
All right. Hostility. Somebody talked about hostility. I'm a naturally outgoing person, but I've found that probably close to 50% of the people that you approach are hostile.
What people that you approach?
People with disabilities. I'm usually very friendly to people on the street, the people I see numerous times on the street in and around my business. My second point was that for a lot of these things, we wouldn't be having these discussions about spending money on handicapping facilities were we not such an incredibly wealthy society. And good thing we are. We all appreciate that. But I spent $30,000 rehabilitating for handicap purposes my ground floor business. And I think one person has used it in a 3 or 4 year period.
Well,
and when I think about that, 10 or 15 businesses on my block, everybody doing exactly the same thing, we're talking about a staggering amount of money. I'll take my comments on the air.
Okay, thanks a lot, Don. That raises the kind of question you were raising. We have we have the voice of small business right here. I'll give you a little bit time to think about an answer to that, and I'll let our audience know that you're listening to Philosophy Talk. Our subject is disability. Our guest is Anita Silvers of San Francisco State University. After the break, we'll take up that last question, but we'll also our conversation has been turning in the direction of maybe disabilities. Maybe we should challenge this underlying assumption of biological abnormality. Maybe disabilities are just another element of human diversity. Maybe you could choose to be deaf, to have your children be deaf. You can join our discussion.
Join us by calling 415-841-4134.
This is an encore presentation of Philosophy Talk. The phone lines are closed.
Philosophy Talk will be right back.
If my colors all run dry, yes, if I ever lose my eyes, I won't have to cry no more.
That was Cat Stevens with Moon Shadow. This is Philosophy Talk, and I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor, and we're joined by our guest Anita Silvers of San Francisco State University. We invite you to join us as well. Call 415-841-4134.
Or email your thoughts to comments@philosophytalk.org.
So, John, I thought you said to me you wanted to respond to that small business guy. You're kind of sympathetic with that line a little bit.
Well, I am. I'm very sympathetic with people with disabilities of all sorts. I've done some work on it. And I'm, very much in favor of the Americans with Disabilities Act. But any act like that, anything that big government gets into, and I think big government's a good thing in many respects, but the guy where the rubber meets the road often ends up suffering. Now, if it's a big institution like Stanford, even though it's always strapped for money, still they can afford to build a lot of handicapped, they say, parking spaces. You pass them every day; they're never full, and you think, "Gosh, I wish I could park there."
Yeah,
but if you're a small businessman and you have to do that, on the other hand, you might say, "Well, maybe the reason they have so few use of that is because they're so badly needed. People aren't in the habit of shopping."
Plus, I think I think there are social costs and benefits, and we should pay the social cost to get the social benefit. It's a benefit. We didn't talk about why this is important, but I think it's a benefit to all of us to have those who have been previously excluded from our common life, our economy, our intellectual life, to be included. So I just think inclusion is a good thing, and we should be willing to pay the cost for
Okay, so Ken, so let me ask you a question. Do you think that the philosophy department ought to take from its budget, hire a few less people for a couple of years and put in some elevators so that our second-floor seminar room is accessible?
I don't know about coming from the philosophy
Are you
department.
in favor of it as long as somebody else
No,
pays
I mean,
for it?
I think the university should be willing to pay that cost for that social good. I do. Yes, definitely. Anita, we're rat-a-tat-tatting back and forth. What do you think?
Well, I think, let me give you an analogy that argue that. When women first started coming into the workplace, private employers said, we have plenty of men to hire. We do not want to bear the expense of making women's restrooms. So I think are you willing to argue the same thing, that women should not have had restrooms because it was very expensive to put them in? By the way, it's not cost effective because I understand it. The number of inches you need per man is much less than the number of inches you need per woman. And this now is an issue called potty justice.
Potty justice.
I didn't make that up. It's true.
There's a future program. We'll have to jot that down. My point is not that these things aren't just or good, but that oftentimes one should have a little sympathy with the person where the rubber meets the road and the money.
Of course.
Yeah, and you should understand the cost as cost. Of course, the real cost. And the question, politics is about distributing cost and distributing benefits. We have a caller in the line. Let's see what some other voices think. David in Oakland, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thanks for taking my call this afternoon. I just got finished reading the ADA. I am temporarily disabled. I have been for the last 5 years due to automobile accidents that were not my fault. Thank you to cell phone technology. And of course, I'm talking on my cell phone now, so kind of
Put on the side of the road, I hope.
I am parked. I wanted to make comment about the notions of accommodation for people that have disabilities, because there are a number of areas and loopholes in the law that allow for the providers of those accommodations to do pretty much whatever they want. There are cost restrictions and considerations, but moreover, the burden of proof that one that's disabled needs to prove. There is a burden of proof placed upon the person that's requesting accommodations.
Yeah.
To demonstrate, in fact, that they need those accommodations.
Right.
And I'd love to hear your comments specifically on that issue, and I'll take your comments off.
Thanks a lot. Anita, you want to weigh in briefly?
Well, that's quite true. Actually, first you have to prove that you count as disabled. Then you have to prove that you need the accommodation, and there's no requirement that you be given the most effective accommodation.
Just some accommodation. Let me briefly shift the topic because we're getting toward the bottom of our time with you, and I want your thoughts on this. You could think. I once heard an argument that people sometimes say, homosexuality is weird because we couldn't be naturally selected to be homosexuals. But then I heard an argument that no, there is an evolutionary argument for homosexuality, because if you have a proportion of gay folks in the hunting population, gay men in the hunting population, then those 12 men in the hunting population will share their food with only 10 women. So 2 out of every 12 guys are going to be gay, and there's an evolutionary argument for that. So it's not biologically abnormal. It's biologically cool. I mean, I don't know if you can make an argument like that for disabilities. Could you?
Well, you can certainly make an argument like that for diversity.
Yeah.
For diverse biological. For diverse biology, we are diverse biologically. The issue is, are some biological conditions worse than others from a survival point of view. If we look at individuals, we might think so, but we don't look at individuals. We should be looking at groups or societies.
The population.
Absolutely.
And of course, what's relevant to us today isn't what kinds of people would have helped us evolve to where we are, but what kinds of people can do what we need done
that's
today.
True. But the question of where does the notion of a biological anomaly, you kind of accepted that. And I was just wondering, maybe even the anomalousness is, something we should...
Yes, I simply needed a word
I know.
that marked a biological atypicality or species atypicality.
Yeah.
But it's very often species atypicality, which is dysfunctional in one circumstance, is very functional in another, and evolutionary biologists and the social evolutionary biologists have very interesting things to say about groups, trust, etc.
So, unfortunately, this is the beginning of a big topic that we don't have time to cover. I wish we'll have you back for another show and we can talk about the evolutionary stuff here. Our guest has been Professor Anita Silvers of San Francisco State University. She's the author of Disability, Difference, Discrimination, Perspectives on Justice in Bioethics and Public Policy. Anita, it's been great having you. Thanks for joining us.
It's wonderful seeing both of you.
Thanks so much for coming, Anita.
So, John, you've been thinking about this disability stuff for a while. I remember the Archimedes project in which you were involved. What do you have any new thoughts? I mean, I know you've been thinking about this hard for a long time.
Well, I think these are fascinating discussions, and especially with someone like Anita, who is both experienced disability firsthand and is a very thoughtful philosopher. I think it evolves. It's been about 5 or 6 years since I did much. Then we were mostly interested in interfaces for people with disabilities onto the internet. A lot has been done since then, but new issues arise. I think the big thing is that philosophy can be fun and interesting, applied to almost any issue.
Yeah.
I hope our listeners are aware of that.
And when I first heard you talk about disabilities using some stuff you learned from that project, I was like, wow, that's cool. Here's the philosophy of action. I mean, it was basically a philosophy of action point, very theoretical point about how we make things happen in the world. And you brought that to bear on this question. And some of that happened today. I thought that was really cool.
So philosophy isn't just the big issues like consciousness and being in the world and
big
nothingness,
abstract issue,
but also, how do you get from here to the second floor without stairs? That's a philosophical issue.
Well, we could keep talking about this for a while. I think we've learned a lot. There's a lot more to say. The discussion continues on our online forum at www.philosophytalk.org. And thanks for joining us.
And if I ever lose my mouth, all my teeth, north and south, yes, if I ever lose my mouth, I won't have to talk.
Philosophy Talk goes to the movies.
Hey, Ken, seen any good movies lately?
Well, I saw The Incredibles. I suppose that counts as a good movie.
I saw that too, Ken. Between your child and my grandchildren, we go to a lot of children's movies. Is there anything really philosophical about The Incredibles?
Well, some people say it's very philosophical. It's got the philosophy of Ayn Rand right there embedded in it,
I was exposing my grandchildren to Ayn Rand without knowing it.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Oh my
I mean,
goodness.
well, let's set up the movie, and you can see why. So what happens? The Incredibles, they're these superheroes.
The main two are Mr. Incredible and
his wife, or his fiance, Elastigirl.
Elastigirl, right? Right.
Yeah, she's a hot superhero.
Well, she's like a superhero of my youth called Plastic Man, except she's a girl.
Yeah, right.
What happens in the movie is Mr. Incredible in particular, and some of the other superheroes, end up getting sued for what you might have thought were really good things. He stops a train from plunging into an abyss where there is no track, but he has to do it in such a way that some people get backaches, and he gets sued, and somehow the government has to pay.
So what does the government do? It overreacts incredibly and tells all the superheroes that they gotta go away. They put them in like a witness protection program or something because they get these new identities and they get these jobs.
Yeah, he's an insurance adjuster. He drives he's a huge guy, and he drives a small car and starts to get overweight, and he doesn't do very well at his job because he takes the insured more seriously than the stockholders of the insurance company, and he eventually gets fired.
One of the messages in this movie is not just the government. Some people see this as an anti-government thing, but also his big insurance company. They're both like risk averse, out for their own good, don't care about other people's, the good of the people they serve or their citizens or something like that. They're just into like everybody being mediocre, nobody standing out, nobody being excellent, nobody taking any risk.
So there were these negative messages about the government that come from Ayn Rand that I didn't even notice in my kind of, take the grandkids to the movie fog.
The deep message is that, well, we're so concerned with equality that we just sort of grind down excellent people and stop them from doing the things that make them excellent.
If this is a reasonable criticism of some government, it surely can't be ours. I mean, I think we could do more for exceptionally gifted youth in the schools than we do, but superheroes, whether they're basketball players or football players or geniuses at physics or outstanding debaters, we have a lot of room for them. The whole America is a very competitive place with lots of rewards, sometimes fame, sometimes fortune for the winners.
But the deep question is, okay, here are these people, outstanding people with amazing talents that none of the rest of us have. How are we supposed to live with them, right? If we demand of them that they just be equal to the rest of us, then we're grinding them down. But if we just let them exercise their talents, then, well, for example, the little boy, the son, who's really fast, he wants to run track. The parents won't let him run track because he'd give away their identity. They're in hiding and they can't. And every time they're discovered, they have to move again. They have to be relocated, because the government forces them into this kind of suburban exile. So how is this kid supposed to live with these outstanding talents? In some ways, the rest of us really can't live with him, the movie seems to say. But then if we prohibit him from exercising those talents, we're all worse off, and he's much worse off. So what are we supposed to do?
Well, when Wilt Chamberlain, who was a good deal taller than anybody else, started playing basketball and he could dunk the ball and do things people had never seen before, what we did was pay him a lot of money.
Yeah. The reason that the government drives the superheroes into exile, and suburban exile, in this dystopia of 9-to-5-ness and ordinariness, the reason it does that is because of what it sees as the cost of letting these folks exercise their super talents. Right? They generate, in economics, they talk about corporations generating externalities, external costs. Mm-hmm. And the superheroes do that. And the question that the movie raises is, well, who should pay the cost? And the government refuses to pay the cost. And the movie basically has a critique. Well, look, you're just so blind to the good that we can do that you take these minor costs to be a reason not to let us do our good. But that's silly, and that's just because of your imperative that everybody should be equal, everybody should be mediocre.
Well, this sounds like a pretty good criticism of a government that treats the superheroes in the way that the one in the movie does. But it sounds like an off-the-wall analogy if it's supposed to apply to our government's reining in certain super entrepreneurs.
Right.
In the first place, it doesn't do much reining in, and in the second place, most of them are not nearly as altruistic as the superheroes are represented as being.
Exactly. So, John, I think The Incredibles is a fun film. I really like you. I enjoyed going to watch it. And there's lots of really good stuff. It's a good narrative. The artwork is beautiful. It's really cool. I just think the sort of philosophical content of it is a little thin and adolescent, even though it's intensely presented.
Well, if that philosophy content was supposed to be in there, I agree with you. I have a sneaking suspicion it's just something the reviewers see that the producers didn't, but I could be wrong. Ken, it's fun talking about movies, but it's also fun to help our listeners talk about the philosophical problems that arise in their own life.
Yeah, if you've got a conundrum, you can send us an email at conundrums@philosophytalk.org. We won't promise to solve your problem, but we will give you lots of new ways to think about it.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University.
Our executive producer is Gordon Earl.
Special thanks to Dave Fusaro, Nicole Sawaya, Roman Mars, and Alan Farley.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from the Hoover Institution, the Greenwell Foundation, and the Pacific Division of the American Philosophical Association.
Also from various groups at Stanford University, the Friends of Philosophy Talk, and the members of KALW Information Radio San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
The conversation continues on our website, www.philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.